What if the most dangerous weapon in the Strait of Hormuz is not a missile? What if it is a boat so small that, by itself, an American warship barely notices it? Now imagine dozens of them, moving fast, approaching from different directions. Some carrying anti-ship missiles, others carrying rockets, others carrying mines designed to turn the water itself into a weapon. And suddenly, the world's most powerful navy faces a problem that cannot be solved simply by firing bigger missiles. This is Iran's so-called Mosquito fleet, face small, fast, cheap, and designed around one brutal idea. You do not defeat a superior navy by becoming stronger than it. You force it to defend itself everywhere at once. Over the past several weeks, that strategy has collided with an entirely new American response. More than 60 Iranian small boats were reportedly destroyed in a single American operation. Then, days later, something even more significant happened. American autonomous surface vessels, boats operating without sailors on board, were used offensively against an Iranian naval facility. The two sides were now fighting with two very different answers to the same problem. Iran had built a fleet designed to overwhelm expensive ships with cheap numbers. The United States was beginning to answer with machines that could potentially overwhelm cheap numbers without risking American crews. And that is why this story is bigger than one naval base. Because the Strait of Hormuz is not just a strip of water. It is one of the most important strategic pressure points on Earth. Look at it from space. The Persian Gulf narrows toward a small maritime corridor connecting it to the Gulf of Oman and the wider Indian Ocean. On a map, it looks almost insignificant, but through this narrow passage moves an enormous share of the world's energy trade. Oil, liquefied natural gas, commercial cargo. Every tanker crossing the waterway is part of a global economic system that stretches from Middle Eastern oil fields to Asian factories, European markets, and American consumers. That makes the strait something more dangerous than a geographic choke point. It is a strategic lever, and Iran knows exactly where to place its hand. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy does not need to defeat the United States Navy ship for ship. It cannot. That is not the strategy. Instead, Iran has spent years developing a different kind of maritime force. Hundreds of small attack craft distributed along the Persian Gulf coastline, fast boats, missile boats, armed patrol craft mines, coastal missile systems. The idea is simple. Make the battlefield too crowded, too fast, too uncertain. A modern American warship carries sophisticated radar, electronic warfare systems, surface, to-air missiles, close, in defenses, and layers of sensors designed to identify threats before they can reach the ship. But those systems were not designed around the assumption that dozens of small contacts might appear simultaneously from different directions. And that creates the first contradiction. The United States has more advanced technology. Iran has more opportunities to create confusion. In a conventional naval battle, the stronger fleet should dominate. In a swarm attack, the question becomes different. Can the stronger fleet identify the real threat quickly enough? Because not every boat has to attack. Some only have to look like they might. That changes everything. For years, American commanders have experienced smaller versions of this problem. In one documented encounter, an Iranian patrol boat approached an American coastal patrol ship at high speed, closing to within roughly 50 yards. In another incident, an IRGC vessel came dangerously close to American ships at night, shining a spotlight toward the bridge of a U.S. destroyer. Individually, these encounters may appear minor, but they reveal something important. Iran has spent years learning how American ships react to maritime pressure. How close can a boat approach? How long will an American commander wait? What triggers a warning? What triggers defensive action? And what happens when the same calculation is repeated? Not once, but dozens of times at once. The Mosquito fleet is therefore more than a collection of small boats. It is a system designed around uncertainty, and the closer the boats get, the more valuable that uncertainty becomes. But here is the problem. A strategy based on swarming only works if the swarm survives long enough to matter. And in early July, the American response became dramatically more aggressive. According to reporting from defense trade publications citing U.S. Central Command, American forces conducted a major wave of strikes around the Strait of Hormuz. More than 80 locations were reportedly targeted. More than 60 of the targets were identified as IRGC small boats. The operation also included coastal radar sites and anti-ship missile capabilities. The message was clear. Washington was no longer simply defending against the Mosquito fleet. It was attempting to destroy the system before the boats could reach the battlefield. And that distinction matters, because the most important target may not be the boat itself. It may be the network that tells the boat where to go, the radar that detects a tanker, the command center that gives the order, the coastal missile battery that forces a ship to change course, the logistics facility that keeps the boat supplied. Destroy the individual boat, and you remove one threat, destroy the system, and you begin changing the entire equation. But the timing of those strikes reveals another contradiction. The American campaign came after Iranian attacks on commercial shipping in and around the strait. And that means the United States was not simply fighting for military superiority. It was fighting for something much harder to measure: freedom of navigation. Because a waterway can remain technically open while becoming practically unusable. A tanker does not have to be sunk for Iran to achieve an effect. The captain only has to decide that continuing is too dangerous. And once enough captains make that decision, the strategic consequences begin far beyond the battlefield. Imagine a tanker bridge at night. The sea is dark. The ship is carrying valuable cargo. Ahead is the Strait of Hormuz. The crew knows that missiles have been fired. Small boats have approached commercial vessels. The political agreement that was supposed to reduce tensions has collapsed. Now the captain has a choice: continue or stop. That decision may have nothing to do with military doctrine, but it can move oil prices, delay deliveries, raise insurance costs, disrupt supply chains, and pressure governments thousands of miles away. That is the hidden power of the Mosquito fleet. It does not need to sink the global economy. It only needs to make the global economy nervous. And that is why the July attacks mattered. According to reporting on the maritime situation, multiple commercial vessels changed routes or stopped their transit after attacks on tankers. Some ships anchored rather than continue through the strait. The physical waterway remained there, but the psychological waterway was beginning to close. This is where the visible war starts to reveal something deeper. Everyone watching the conflict sees boats, missiles, ships, explosions. But the real contest is over control. Who controls the movement of commercial vessels? Who controls the risk calculation? Who decides whether the strait is safe? And who can convince the world that it is not? That is why American officials have pushed back against Iranian claims that Tehran controls the waterway. From Washington's perspective, the strait must remain open, not simply because of military prestige, because the credibility of American power depends on it. If the United States cannot guarantee freedom of navigation through one of the world's most important maritime choke points, every ally and every commercial operator begins asking the same uncomfortable question: what exactly can American power guarantee? But Iran faces a different calculation. It does not need permanent control. It may only need temporary disruption. A few hours, a few days, enough uncertainty to force shipping companies to hesitate, enough pressure to make governments reconsider their policies, enough economic pain to create leverage at the negotiating table. This is asymmetric strategy at its most basic. The weaker side does not try to win the same game. It changes the game. And now, Iran's Mosquito fleet is facing an unexpected problem. The United States has begun changing the game too. on July 5. According to U.S. military statements and reporting on the operation, 3 autonomous surface vessels were used in an offensive strike against Iran's Bandar Abbas naval facility. No sailors were aboard. No American crew had to physically enter the harbor. The boats approached from different directions, and then they struck. The symbolism is almost impossible to miss. Iran spent years developing small, relatively inexpensive vessels to threaten large American warships. Now America was sending relatively small, unmanned vessels toward an Iranian naval target. The swarm had met its reflection. But this is where the story becomes much bigger than the Strait of Hormuz, because the question is no longer simply whether Iran can threaten American ships. The question is whether the United States can build an entirely new way of fighting at sea. A future where the first vessels entering a contested harbor are not destroyers, not frigates, not aircraft carriers, but machines, cheap enough to risk, smart enough to navigate, and expendable enough that losing one does not mean losing a sailor. That possibility changes the strategic equation, but it also creates a new mystery. If Iran's Mosquito fleet was designed to make expensive ships vulnerable to cheap boats, what happens when the expensive navy stops answering with expensive ships? What happens when the swarm is met by another swarm? And what happens when the battle for the Strait of Hormuz is no longer decided by who has the biggest warship, but by who can create the most uncertainty at the lowest cost for the longest time? Because beneath the missiles and speedboats, something far more consequential is beginning to emerge, a new kind of naval war. And the Strait of Hormuz may be the place where the world gets its first real glimpse of it. Everyone thinks this battle is about boats. Iranian speedboats racing across dark water, American warships watching radar screens, missiles rising from the coastline, autonomous vessels slipping toward a naval base without a sailor aboard. But the real battle is about something much harder to see: decision-making. Because the Strait of Hormuz is not valuable simply because it is narrow. It is valuable because every government, every shipping company, every insurance underwriter, and every military commander has to make a decision about it. Do you transit? Do you wait? Do you reroute? Do you strike? Do you escalate? And that is where Iran's Mosquito fleet becomes far more important than its individual boats. A small craft carrying an anti-ship missile may not be powerful enough to defeat an American warship in a conventional fight, but it does not need to. It only needs to create enough uncertainty that the warship changes its behavior. That is the invisible battlefield. The boat is the physical weapon, the uncertainty is the strategic weapon. And suddenly the question is no longer how many Iranian boats remain. The question becomes how much uncertainty Iran can still create with the boats it has left. That is a very different calculation. Look at the strait from above. On a satellite image, the waterway appears almost deceptively simple. A narrow passage connecting the Persian Gulf to the Gulf of Oman. But beneath that image is a complex network of shipping lanes, offshore infrastructure, ports, oil terminals, radar stations, air defenses, and military bases. A ship moving through the strait is not simply moving through water. It is moving through a decision space. Every unidentified contact matters. Every radar return matters. Every warning from an Iranian patrol boat creates another calculation. And the more uncertain the environment becomes, the more expensive the waterway becomes. That is why the economic battlefield follows the military one. Before the war, roughly a quarter of the world's seaborne oil trade and a significant share of global liquefied natural gas passed through this corridor. When shipping companies began anchoring vessels outside the strait or rerouting them, the physical waterway did not disappear, but economically, its value began to change. A tanker sitting still is not delivering cargo. A ship taking a longer route is burning more fuel. An insurance premium rising by thousands of dollars can become a strategic weapon. Even when no missile is fired, This is the part most people miss. You do not have to physically close the Strait of Hormuz to disrupt it. You only have to make enough people believe that crossing it is no longer worth the risk. And that creates a problem for the United States. Because American military power is designed, in part, to keep global commerce moving. But protecting every ship individually is expensive. Every escort requires aircraft. Every aircraft requires fuel. Every patrol requires, every radar contact requires attention. And every defensive interceptor costs money. Iran's strategy exploits that imbalance. A relatively inexpensive threat can force a much more expensive response. That is asymmetric warfare. But now the United States is trying to reverse the equation. And that is where the autonomous boats enter the story. The Bandar Abbas operation matters because it represents a fundamental change in the logic of naval combat. For decades, the American answer to an Iranian swarm was largely human, sailors, pilots, warships, helicopters, aircraft. Every platform carried people. Every dangerous mission carried a human cost. But an autonomous surface vessel changes that equation. Imagine the scene: 24 feet of composite hull moving across dark water. No cockpit, no sailor looking through a windshield, no crew waiting below deck, just sensors, navigation systems, communications, and software. The vessel does not need to survive the way a manned ship does. It only needs to complete its mission. That distinction is enormous. Because the most expensive part of a modern warship may not be its missile systems. It may be the people inside it. And once that assumption changes, naval strategy begins changing with it. The United States can begin asking a different question. Instead of how do we protect every expensive platform, it can ask, how many inexpensive autonomous platforms can we place into the battle space? That is the mirror image of Iran's strategy. Iran uses cheap boats to threaten expensive ships. America can use relatively inexpensive autonomous systems to hunt cheap boats, attack fixed targets, extend surveillance, and create new tactical dilemmas. The swarm has found its reflection, but here's the contradiction. Autonomy does not eliminate risk. It moves risk somewhere else. The moment a machine is allowed to operate without a human physically controlling every movement, the battlefield becomes a technological and legal problem as much as a military one. What happens when communications are interrupted? What happens when sensors misidentify a target? What happens when an autonomous system encounters a civilian vessel? And who is responsible for the decision? The commander, the software, the engineers, the political leadership that authorized the mission. This is where the future battlefield becomes uncomfortable. The technology may be cheap, the consequences are not. And the United States is not the only country watching. Every major military with a coastline is watching what happens in the Strait of Hormuz. Because the underlying lesson is portable. A weaker military does not necessarily need to defeat a stronger navy. It may only need to make the stronger navy spend too much money, move too slowly, or hesitate too often. That logic applies in the Persian Gulf. It applies in the Red Sea. It applies in the Pacific. And potentially, it applies anywhere narrow waters meet advanced sensors and cheap autonomous systems. This is why the Strait of Hormuz is becoming a laboratory for the next generation of naval warfare. The weapons are changing, but the deeper transformation is happening in the economics of combat. For centuries, naval power was measured by the size of ships. Then it became a question of missiles, then sensors. Now it may increasingly become a question of numbers. How many autonomous systems can you deploy? How quickly can you replace them? How cheaply can you produce them? How many can your enemy destroy before the cost becomes unacceptable? The industrial base begins to matter as much as the fleet. And that brings us to another hidden battlefield production. A missile can be intercepted, a drone boat can be destroyed, a speedboat can be sunk. But if one side can replace its losses faster than the other side can destroy them, the battlefield changes again. That is why the confirmed destruction of more than 60 Iranian small boats matters. Not because the number itself guarantees anything, it does not. The real question is what percentage of Iran's usable maritime force that number represents. And that is something the public cannot fully know. Iran's fleet is distributed. Its boats operate from multiple locations. Its inventory is difficult to measure from open sources. Some vessels may be operational, others may be damaged, some may be hidden, others may be rebuilt. The uncertainty itself becomes part of the war. This is why claims of total destruction should be treated carefully. A military capability rarely disappears simply because a headline says it has been destroyed, but neither does it remain fully intact simply because a government says it does. The truth usually sits somewhere inside the fog, and the only way to find it is to watch what each side does next. If Iran continues launching coordinated maritime attacks, its swarm capability remains meaningful. If those attacks become smaller, less frequent, or more cautious, that may indicate pressure is accumulating. If American autonomous vessels appear, again, the Bandar Abbas strike may prove to have been the beginning of a new operational model rather than a single dramatic experiment. And if commercial shipping begins returning to the strait in significant numbers, that will tell us something no press conference can. It will tell us that confidence is returning, because in the end, that is what both sides are fighting over. Confidence. Iran wants shipping companies to believe that American military power cannot guarantee safe passage. The United States wants them to believe the opposite. That is why the war cannot be measured only in missiles fired or boats destroyed. It must also be measured in ships moving, ships rerouting, and ships deciding whether the risk is acceptable. That is the true battlefield. A radar operator watching a small contact is making a decision. A tanker captain slowing his vessel is making a decision. An insurance company raising its rates is making a decision. A military commander launching an autonomous boat is making a decision. A government deciding whether to escalate is making a decision. And all of those decisions interact. That is what makes the Strait of Hormuz so strategically dangerous. It connects military power to energy markets to global economies, economies to politics, and politics back to military action. One missile can damage a ship. One swarm can close a shipping lane. But uncertainty can change an entire global system. The question is no longer whether Iran's Mosquito fleet can defeat the United States Navy in a conventional naval battle. It probably never needed to. The real question is whether Iran can continue creating enough uncertainty to make the world's most important energy corridor more expensive, more dangerous, and more politically difficult to defend. And there is an even bigger question emerging from the American response. If autonomous boats can be used to counter Iranian swarms today, what happens when both sides possess thousands of them tomorrow? When the battlefield is filled with machines that are cheaper than warships, faster to replace than sailors, and capable of operating without putting human crews directly into danger. The traditional balance of naval power begins to change. The Strait of Hormuz may therefore be remembered for something far beyond this war, not simply as the place where Iran challenged American naval power, but as the place where two competing visions of future warfare collided. One side using cheap numbers to threaten expensive systems, the other using autonomous systems to defeat cheap numbers. And somewhere between them sits the world's energy economy, waiting to see which strategy can survive longer. The question is no longer who has the strongest navy. The real question is who can build the better system for fighting a war where the cheapest weapon may create the most expensive decision. So here's the question. Future naval wars are fought by swarms of autonomous machines instead of crews aboard traditional warships. Will the side with the most powerful weapons still win, or will the advantage belong to the side that can produce, replace, and coordinate the most machines?